We heard so much today about people very actively working on solutions to tackle the climate crisis. But we also see that climate change is losing importance in public perception. In a FOSA survey at the end of 2024, 39% of respondents cited that the environment and climate change as one of the two most important problems Germany is facing. And 3 years ago, this amount was 59%, so this is decreasing. But we know that transformation requires a broad basis in society. So the question is, how do we manage to bring climate protection and in particular the principles of circularity back into the public discourse? And that's what this panel is about, and I'm very happy to have you as panelists with me. Joss Blériot from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, who has been working for many years in direct contact with governments, with institutions such as the EU Commission, trying to find ways to introduce the principles of circularity into climate discussion, into climate goals, and I'm sure you can provide very exciting insights for us. And I'm looking forward to the perspective of Hans-Peter Klebender, Head of Smart Mobility Management Studies at the University of St. Gallen, for many years in leading positions at BMW and Audi, and with us as an independent expert. And a warm welcome to my dear colleague Florian Reiter, who helped to set up Focus Online Earth and gives a lot of thought on how we can make these climate topics accessible to our users. So let's start with a supposedly banal question. Which of you are worried about climate change? All hands up. So how do you personally deal with these concerns? Can you give us a little insight?
I stopped watching the news.
That's one way.
No more Focus Online.
I hope on Focus Online Earth you don't get this feeling. So Hans-Peter, what about you?
It's part of my job. I got 3 kids, 13, 18, and 28. So the best feedback also to train and to change my behavior in things I love and I stand for. But it's more frustrating and harder than, let's say, the next 5 to 6 years. You mentioned this study. I know another study in the recent elections in Germany, which are just a few months away. It was below 10% of the people who elected who thought it's a really important topic. So we're really in this dip right here.
And you mentioned that all of us, we are professionally working on this topic and have the possibility to look for solutions in our work life. And I think that could make a difference because not many people have this opportunity. And for them, I can imagine that they feel much more powerless when they look at the problem of climate crisis. Do you think that's part of the explanation why people turn away from this topic?
Well, it's definitely part of that, for sure. There is a combination of technicality, the fact that people are living within a linear system, so you can only play the cards that you've been dealt with. I think that for the people who have heard about these concerns for a very long time, and for a long time the finger has been pointed and said, as a consumer, you can fix this. It wasn't true, it was never true. You create a backlash of people who have tried to do the right thing, who say, well, I don't have the right systems in order to contribute to that. I don't have the purchasing power to contribute to that. Actually, I live in a rural setting. I cannot do away with my car. So, and you've seen that actually perhaps the best example was the Yellow Jackets in France. Because it started off, I don't think a lot of people remember, it started by saying we're going to put heavier taxes on diesel cars and old cars and transportation. That hit the people who could not afford to transition anyway. And so because there was no compensation, no solution in place, it triggered that frustration, which led into, it blossomed into a much bigger political question, but it really started from that. So there's an element of, a lot of people are using the topic as a political dog whistling mechanism to say, green, progressives, it's all the higher classes, the big businesses who can afford to do that, they're imposing this on you, and then you fuel populism through that. I could go on, but the fact is that until you say there is an actual solution to this, which goes through specific economic reforms that need to be balanced. So you can tax something to eliminate it, but you have to give an incentive on the other side. It can't be black or white and say, if you want to make polluting cars that are a bit old, if you want to take them off the road, you have to invest in free public transport. You have to have a backup solution, otherwise it doesn't work. And the fact is it's been used as an ideological battle and pitched as, that's another way of the captains of industry to sell you more stuff that you can't afford. That's a massive problem.
Hans-Peter, you are a very active communicator, so what strategies of getting through to the people did you find to be most successful?
I just would add, we have the situation in Germany that elections are done by bringing fear to the people that you take something away. And so in Germany, the car is just our most loved thing, and we are dependent on it. 90% of the people who live in rural areas, which are 2/3, are dependent on their car. We have a brutal misincentivation, so there's no incentive for really changing behavior. I give you one example. We had, for big cars, SUVs, we had up to 9,000 euro for 5 years compensation, but it didn't matter how big they are. And for smaller cars, as a matter of fact, I work for a small company with small cars, and we were too small, too light to receive those incentives. And we also don't get the CO2 emissions. So the whole system is bankrupt and rotten, at least here. That's on the industry side. And on the political side, elections of our mayors, like in Berlin and Munich, they are won by people who live in the city and who live outside of the city. And by doing this as your strategy for politics, and you tell them outside that you are not allowed to come in, also the conservative parties won the election. So it's in the middle of the political debate, is misused to make fear and to win elections. And the real idea to change this behavior, it's way back. It's forgotten.
So that's the political side, where we at the moment tend to see two sides and have them as opponents. But you are also trying to have examples from daily life, from business. So do you have any positive examples for us as well?
We have some brand in Germany like Schöffel. It's a textile brand. They take, bake, and recycle. So we have a lot of small initiatives, but they don't reach a big level and they don't get media attention. And we have, in the car industry where I come from, we have 2 interesting developments. The one I noted is the new battery passport. It's mandatory by 27. So every big battery pack needs to have a passport that you know where it comes from, it's traceable, and so on. So there are a lot of initiatives, but they are very small, and they don't really address the consumer market in the end. And so there are small examples, but they also don't get the political support and attention, and they don't have any voice in the media. So the last half year, it was all covered by the election, and it was just not a topic because it was not a topic of the political parties. And so it's a very challenging time, and hopefully these initiatives, I walked through exhibitions, there are a lot of great ideas, great inventors, hopefully they get back on track and politics will listen to them and also change regulation.
And I think this is a crucial point because there are many success stories, but maybe we as media, Florian, got used to not telling so many success stories, but often focus on the problems. with Focus Online Earth, we generated some insights on how to deal with climate topics in the last 2 years. So maybe you could share a little on this. Is it different from other topics? What did you learn?
I think it's interesting because as a journalist, you get trained a certain way, right? Journalism in itself is a very problem-oriented profession. Your self-understanding of journalism is like of a profession that uncovers scandals, uncovers problems, and highlights some hidden underlying problem that plagues society. Democracy dies in darkness and all that. And I think that's a very important role for journalism to play in a society, but it also has the problem that it fails to portray the whole picture. That a lot of times it fails to portray, for example, people who are working on solutions or solutions that might have been already put into effect. Or a lot of times it often fails to portray things that are actually going well, because in the logic of journalism, things that are going well are boring and they're not really a story. But if you do that, if you neglect to tell those stories, you obviously neglect to paint the whole picture, and that obviously has certain effects on how people that are reading your publications conceive certain things and conceive of certain problems. So I think that's a very, very important thing to keep in the back of your mind when you're talking about journalism. And one thing that we learned about climate journalism when we were starting Focus on Earth is that all those rules that we think that are always existing in journalism don't really apply to climate journalism. Like we've received the feedback that people that read climate journalism actually just don't want to read about the problem, that they want to go even further and they want to read about certain possible solutions to that problem. And they also want to read about things that are actually going well. And so when we just look at traffic numbers, and if we just look at the blank numbers, we can actually see that stories with a positive slant or stories that try to portray a solution to a certain problem actually perform slightly better than stories that just present the problem and then go on with their lives. And so I think that was a very interesting lesson for us, because it forced us to rewire our whole brain to how journalism actually works, because as I mentioned, you get trained a certain way. And so yeah, that was a little humbling for us in the beginning, but it also opens up a lot of possibilities, which is very exciting.
And for me, it makes perfectly sense why we see this with a topic like climate change, because as we said in the beginning, it's quite scary and many people feel powerless. But I'm convinced it's also true for other topics, but climate is a topic where it's very, very obvious. Joss, you have a lot of contact with governments, and you are involved in negotiations. And even if we talk a lot about sustainability, the principles of circularity are less prominent in public opinion. What do you think? Why is that? Why doesn't it come through?
I mean, I think we're having cycles, really. The whole sustainability and circular economy topic rose in Europe when there was a lot of volatility and resource scarcity in the market in the early 2000s. Now, I'll give you an example. 2010, one of the big European car manufacturers saw their raw material bill jump by 50% in a matter of 4 months. And circular economy was seen as a way to de-risk that. Then we went into the period when it was more accepted and it became part of the Green Deal and became almost a usual concept. Now we had the shock of COVID, we had the shock of the Ukraine war, we have many, the shock of tariffs, you name it. So we're back into that sovereignty, material security phase, which is okay in a way, because as long as it pushes circular economy, we're still in the right place. I guess one thing that I wanted to mention when it comes to climate, I hope it's not me making that noise, is we still consider that the climate story is linked to an energy transition story, and we forget that the material side of the economy is absolutely crucial. And companies are really at odds, even the ones who want to make circular economy their priority, they cannot, because they don't have the accounting methodologies to say we reduced our emission by X% strictly due to circular economy strategy. So it's easy to say, I've reduced my CO2 emissions because all of my trucks are now electric. You can quantify that. But when you say, I've changed my supply and I use secondary raw materials, the impact of that is really hard to quantify. There's also a level of transparency that we need to have. European economies are low carbon because we offshore our polluting activities. Things like the carbon border adjustment mechanism coming into play is good news, because then we look at the carbon content of the imported goods. But all of that is slow. But I think it's really important as well to not, in the media or in the narrative, say that climate change is that big thing that is going to fall upon us. And actually, if you don't have solar panels, you're contributing to the problem. No, it's not true. You can have solar panels on your roof and still overconsume and not see the impact of your consumption in CO2 emissions because the products are not accounted for simply because the methodology doesn't exist yet. It's a bit technical story, but it really is important.
Harder to tell, but not less important, yeah. Hans-Peter, we already touched the mobility sector, and especially in Germany, we tend to talk about bans when it's about cars. Do you have a positive example how other countries, societies deal with this topic and not go into this trap of just thinking about what can't we do anymore, but think about what can we do in the future?
No, concerning mobility, we are a developing country, looking at infrastructure and our car industry, which is still very much backwards. If you look at even our neighbors, Austria and Zurich, they have a nice public transport. They have another incentivation. And I think the big thing will be, in a Europe scale, will be corporate mobility, the B2B thing, because you can regulate it. You want to regulate the private mobility behavior. And there we have a lot of good examples that, like Netherlands, Belgium, they subsidize, like commuting, what do you call it, if you travel together?
Carpooling.
Carpooling. And just say incentivize not the if you buy a car, but how you use it. And that's a big topic. And I think what he mentioned with traceability and that we have to measure our CO2 footprint, it will be mandatory in 2026 Europe-wide, and then people have an incentive, because if not, the corporations pay penalties, and that will be the big shift. And some countries are more advanced in this, and I think that the biggest leverage we have now. But in the end, we can learn from Paris, Barcelona. There are a lot of examples, Stockholm in Europe. If you look at cities who are at the forefront of this mobility revolution and could learn definitely a lot.
So Florian, this is something you are doing at Focus Online Earth too, looking at other countries. Like we talked about this sometimes negative focus that journalists have. So did working on these topics change something for you too?
Yeah, it actually made me weirdly more hopeful for the future, because I get to meet so many intelligent and smart and passionate people who are actually working on that problem. And if you're going to meet so many people, at a certain point you start thinking, okay, how big are the chances that we are not going to be able to tackle this problem? And I think that's what also it's been like a North Star for our coverage, that we are trying to center a light on those people who are trying to solve those problems, because I personally think you can tell the story of climate change in like two different ways, right? So the one way to tell this story of climate change is of like this apocalyptic threat that's going to come for us and it's going to kill us all in the near future, as you said. But I think the other perspective of the story is that of like a big challenge that we have to tackle at some point, and it's a big transformation that we're going to embark upon. But it's also like a very big chance that it goes with this challenge. And when we come out of it on the other side, we're going to be better off for it. We're going to be more prosperous, we're going to be more healthy, we're going to have a lot of other benefits. And I think both of those perspectives are true, at least to a certain extent. But I think that one perspective gets played up a lot more than the other perspective. And I think it's gonna be important to strike a balance in that. Like, you can't neglect the problems, you can't neglect the last apocalyptic projections, you can't neglect the numbers coming out how Germany will get hit by a heat summer. You have to talk about those things, but I think you have to hit some kind of a balance.
And we are doing this for circular topics as well, and not only when it's Circular Republic Festival. So do you have some examples how the storytelling works with circular topics?
I think circularity is actually a topic that lends itself very well to those kind of stories, even if it might not sound obvious on first glance. But I mean, it's a story of a big solution that can be implemented in a lot of different ways and that can play a huge role in the daily life of a lot of people. Like, for example, I keep thinking back to a story that my colleague Stephanie Haas wrote like 1.5 years ago when we had the last Circular Republic. She was writing about this company called Lorenz, which is like a 60-year-old family company that produces water meters. And water meters is not really a sexy topic, to be honest. It's not really something a lot of people think about. But she managed to tell the story in such a way that it's about a family company that has to reinvent itself in the face of like growing competition from China. And circularity was one way to reinvent themselves and to give themselves an edge in comparison to the competition that comes from China. And so that was a very compelling story that you managed to tell about this family company reinventing itself. And I think more than 200,000 people were actually reading that story. It was like one of our best performing stories of the month. And it was a story about water meters, you know, so that was something we didn't really anticipate. But it goes to show that how much like a compelling story and a compelling narrative can drive like attention in a field like circular, because, as I said, it lends itself in a lot of different ways.
At this point, we want to use the time left to see if you have some questions at this panel. As it's about solutions for circular economy here, I could imagine that some of you are interested in how to communicate this in the best way, and we have the experts here.
Hey. Over here in the back.
Yeah.
I have a question to Florian and Linda. Florian, you mentioned it's about problems, or journalism isn't a lot about problems. And at the same time, I feel, let's say, beyond Focus Earth, more on a general media level, climate change is a problem, biodiversity loss is a problem, climate inequality is a problem, and I feel these problems are not covered enough. So how do you explain that?
I think the explanation is simple. You're right. That's all. That's basically all I can say about it. It's a very complex topic. It's a topic that we have been trying to tackle for like 2 years now, and it's a topic that we're still struggling with building building knowledge for ourselves, and it's a topic we're still struggling to convey to our users. But the funny thing about biodiversity, especially, is that whenever we try and whenever we find like a certain angle that works, we actually realize that this angle works very well, and that biodiversity stories are very well like undercovered in the current media landscape. So I think you're totally right. I think that's something that we need to work on. I think that's something that we've gotten better on in the past, but I think it's something that a lot of media staffs, us totally included, tend to shy a little bit away from, but I do think that's a mistake.
And as a short addition to that, so in my role, sometimes when I read the text someone from my team wrote, I say it's good, but it's 3 different topics, so you can't put everything together in one piece. Because climate change and all the related problems, it's very complex. And we also try to find this way to communicate with our users in a way they can understand, they can read it when they're on their way to work or whatever. So we try to cover as many topics as possible in this range, but we also try to make it snackable, understandable, and I think this is a challenge, but it's interesting because you reach people that maybe otherwise wouldn't connect with these topics. So maybe the impact is even greater than when you are at a very, very educated audience on this topic.
Hey, Lukas Torst here. My question is, when we look around the world, right, right-wing populists are gaining tractions, climate deniers, science deniers are gaining traction. And we do know from science what we need to do, what problems are there. How do we win back the battlefield of social media? Do we need to train our AI bots on academic papers and reports that you do and just flood social media with it, or how do we get to mobilize the masses and voters?
That's a tough one.
I'm not really
panel.
sure I have an answer for that, but I think there is something interesting in what you say, is that the science is clear. Well, the science is clear if you understand the science, but the science is clear. It's not true, actually. The science says everything, but I don't know, and I have the utmost respect for the work that the IPCC does, but has any of you ever tried to read one of their reports, right? I mean, it's 600 pages, it's really impossible to understand. That work needs to happen because you need the scientific basis, but then the next piece, and that's probably actually a big question for the media in general, how do you help the scientists translate that into simple stories? Because simplicity is what wins over people in social media. You got a big thing that's shiny and problematic, you got somebody to blame, and you kind of know who has the solution if you pretend you have it in 3 bullet points. That's not the way it works. So I think there's something at the interface between you have the complexity, let us help you turn that into a compelling, striking, simple narrative. On the AI tools and social media, I don't know. That's not my area of expertise. But I think there's a disconnect between what we need to know and what we need to communicate.
Thanks,
I
Jos.
would think that in the younger generation, without social media, it will not work at all. And we have like platforms also like Watson who are addressing the younger target group. So there's a very big potential. Also look at YouTube. And there are very good examples now in the German media how to transform these scientific ideas. But they don't reach the broad public, and it's a age thing. But in the end, look at the car industry. So now how to make brands sexy, tell great stories. And circularity has great stories, but they don't get the attention up to now.
And I think it's a common task because it's not only about media as communicators, but in this world that you described, all of us are communicators. So it's a common task. So as we are running out of time, thank you so much for the discussion. Thanks a lot.